Item 10B, receive a report and provide direction to staff on the public draft walk and bike plan.
Good evening, Honorable Mayor and City Council members. David Woltering, Community Development Director for San Bruno. Tonight, I'd like to frame our discussion for you on the walk and bike plan. The city entered into a contract with Eisen Latunich in May of 2015 to produce a bicycle pedestrian master plan for the city of San Bruno. And I'm pleased to say since July, we've been working on that plan, July of last year, and over the past 12 months, we've had a number of community meetings and outreach efforts, and we, at this point, have a draft plan that we're presenting to you tonight, really as a preview. We intend to bring this plan back to you for formal consideration for adoption, but the purpose of tonight's meeting really is for the consultant and our staff to present this plan to you to get your suggestions and comments for any possible further adjustments or amendments before we bring it back to you for consideration for adoption. I'll provide a brief introduction followed by our consultant, Nico Latunich, who will go into more detail and describe the process we went through in terms of developing the plan for consideration. And then we'll conclude with what are next steps in terms of moving this forward. As far as a brief introduction, the purpose of the walk and bike plan, as we call it, really a bicycle and pedestrian master plan, really is to implement the city's general plan. In the city's general plan, there are policy provisions that talk about promoting walking and biking within our community and really making walking and biking more safe, more comfortable, more convenient for people who reside in our community and visit our community. So in a sense, the walk and bike plan is a master plan to provide more detail in terms of how we can implement our general plan. The city was able to obtain a matching grant to hire the consultant to pursue and prepare this plan. We've been working for the last 12 months. We've had a number of community outreach efforts at this point. As far as Nico's presentation tonight, Nico Latunich, our consultant, will talk about what are the objectives of the plan, what was the process we went through, what are some of the pedestrian, bicycle, and programmatic projects that we've identified that could be considered in terms of adopting the plan, and then what about implementation? What's been identified is a menu, essentially, of projects, bicycle improvements, pedestrian improvements, and programs that the city could consider, kind of a framework for future consideration. Cost estimates have been provided in the plan itself, but essentially this framework would provide the opportunity for the city over time, over an extended period of time, to achieve the objectives of the walk and bike plan. And what we would anticipate is that there would be an implementation task force, likely a staff level task force that would be given the responsibility to work with the council and other committee members to make sure that the walk and bike plan is implemented over time and really focus on that implementation. We would expect to look for grant opportunities to implement the plan. And in fact, the idea of preparing a master plan like this is to identify, well, what is the framework for achieving the objectives of the general plan, so that as there are grant opportunities available to do specific projects and programs, we would have an adopted plan that would support our application and make our application more competitive for receiving funding to do individual projects. We understand that there are a number of projects that the City Council will need to consider on any year, and the idea really is to look at this framework. Would individual projects fit into your overall plan for implementing the needs of the community, addressing the needs of the community? We would try to identify grant funds that could support individual projects. So as part of your annual budget process, we would anticipate suggesting projects that could go forward based on identified funding opportunities on an annual basis and/or with your CIP. So that's kind of how we anticipate moving forward. I think Nico will provide more detail in terms of an overview, and then our project manager on this, Paula Bradley, will talk about next steps. Tonight we have a number of Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee members in the audience. They worked a great deal on this plan, provided a lot of input. Other committees and commissions here at the city did as well, TSPC, and certainly other staff members. So we look forward to Nico's presentation. Nico, Paula, myself would be happy to answer any of your questions this evening. Thank you. Nico.
Thanks. Is there a slide clicker?
I can advance this for you if you
Okay,
like.
great. Good evening, City Council members. Let me first tell you why it is that we're doing this plan. The objectives were, one, to find out what are the walking and biking related needs and concerns of the San Bruno community, then to respond to those needs and concerns by coming up with a set of recommended improvements on both the pedestrian and the bicycling side. Also to develop some implementation tools to increase the plan's chances that it will be implemented as opposed to just sitting on a shelf gathering dust. And then the last one, which is sort of a broader goal, is to supplement the BPAC's great efforts at building the community here in San Bruno, give people a chance to engage in pedestrian and bicycle planning, and hopefully build a constituency that will advocate for some of these improvements to happen over the next few years. Let me give you an overview of the planning process. As Director Woltering said, we started about a year ago with initial outreach. The point of that was just to let people know that this was starting to happen, get people starting to get involved, build our email distribution list so that we send out regular updates and announcements. Then we did an inventory of existing conditions, just looking objectively at the state of walking and biking in San Bruno. We looked at things like, what are the key destinations? Where are they? What is the street network like? What are the existing facilities like? Number of traffic collisions involving pedestrians and cyclists. That was really good and helpful, but it really lacked the community's perspective, the user perspective. So then we did a needs assessment process where we went out to the community, did really extensive outreach, and asked people, what's on your mind? What are your needs? What are your concerns when it comes to walking and biking? We got hundreds and hundreds of comments. Those have all been documented in various appendices in the plan. They take up a lot of pages. It's pretty interesting reading because it gives you an idea of really what people are thinking. I think we got, I forget the exact number, but it was something like 1,300 individual comments. That gave us a really good idea of what people cared about. On the pedestrian side, the main issue by far was how challenging it was to cross the busy streets, particularly El Camino Real, but also some of the other arterials. On the bicycling side, it was the lack of dedicated bikeways, particularly for north-south connections and east-west connections as well. And then on both sides there, we heard a lot about driver behavior, careless, aggressive driver behavior in the form of speeding, not yielding to pedestrians, blocking the sidewalk when they park, those sorts of things. So then, armed with that information, we put together the list of improvements, and those form the heart of the plan. They take up 4 chapters, which I will go into a little bit more detail later. We're now, we created a draft, admin draft plan that was reviewed by staff. We revised it, put out the public draft, which is which you're reviewing now, and that will hopefully bring us to the end of the process, hopefully later this month. And if you can, if you'll click one more time, just concurrent with all that, we've also been doing the CEQA environmental clearance process for the plan. So like I said, the heart of the plan is the set of recommendations, and there's 4 chapters devoted to that. The first chapter is pedestrian projects. Here, just to give you an overview, there's a map of all the projects. The map is included in the plan. The main types of projects are street crossing improvements, because like I said, that's the main concern that people had. There's a couple of projects to fill in sidewalk gaps, and then a couple of streetscaping projects. So that's on the pedestrian side. And when I talk about Thank you. When I talk about crossing improvements, this is just some ideas, some things that you can do to make it safer and easier for people to cross, less intimidating. Visual narrowing of the crosswalk, it doesn't really take away capacity, but it just gives drivers visual cues that they should be slowing down, that they can expect pedestrians in the area. There's these sidewalk bulb outs that shorten the crossing distance, pedestrian refuges in the middle of the street for people who can't quite make it all the way across in one phase, and flashing signs, warning signs. There's any number of other strategies. On the bicycling side, we formulated this citywide network of bikeways. Some of those are bike lanes, which you're probably familiar with. Some of those are bike routes where there isn't room to put in a bike lane. That's just signage and stencils on the pavement. We looked and looked for good opportunities for actual separated trails, paths. It was really tough to do. I'll talk about that a little bit more. David? At this point, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Andrew, who's going to just walk you through 4 conceptual drawings that we did to illustrate what some of these improvements might look like. These are drawings that the city could use when they apply for funding for projects, and I will let Andrew just tell you about 4 of them.
Good evening, Council and Mayor. My name is Andrew Lee. I'm with Parisi Transportation Consulting, and I'm the transportation engineer that worked on the conceptual designs. There's really a lot of different designs in the plan, and we're only giving you a brief highlight of some of the innovative designs that we've come up with. The first that I'll call out to you is a mini roundabout. We're showing the location at Crystal Springs and Oak, but this is just an example template. We are still working with city staff to identify the appropriate place. If you're familiar with roundabouts, they're very effective in calming traffic down to reduce the number of conflicts, making it easier for pedestrians to cross the street, especially when it's particularly wide. And in this particular location, it is a very wide intersection, it's very busy, and this simplifies the motion through the intersection. Next. Another example of a very innovative, exciting opportunity is on Huntington, north of downtown, and the principle behind this is to connect the Centennial Way Trail, which currently ends as it enters the city, and we don't really have a bicycle facility from the trail all the way down to the BART station and to the Caltrain station. So using what we call a road diet, where you have a road that is designed for a certain capacity, but maybe it's not really being used by that much traffic, there's an opportunity to take one of those traffic lanes and to create a bicycle facility, in this case, a 2-way bicycle facility, so riders are riding in both directions, and they're protected with either a raised curb or some other feature, and it makes for a very comfortable facility. We consider it suitable for ages from 8 all the way to 80. One more example of a protected bikeway. This is another variant where instead of a traditional bike lane where you're putting bicyclists between moving cars and parked cars, we move the parked cars over into the street, and we protect the cyclists by putting them closer to the sidewalk. And so in this case, you're a lot more comfortable because you're not at risk of being hit by a car on your left and not having a car door open on your right. And so, again, it's an example of a facility that's comfortable for ages 8 to 80. And then lastly, where there are streets that are rather narrow and the opportunity to put in a new bike lane may be limited, we propose bike route improvements, and in this case, Elm and Linden. They're relatively narrow streets. They run parallel to each other, and there's opportunities to calm this down by either putting in striping to define the lanes to make them a bit narrower and slow traffic down, because it's very tempting to go kind of fast on hilly streets when they're a straight alignment, and also to remind drivers that bicyclists are there to share the road with them, and so we have an example of a shared lane marking that you may be familiar with. And so this is just a brief highlight of some of the designs that we have. There's a lot more in the plan we don't have time to discuss.
Thanks, Andrew. The third part of the recommendations are non-infrastructural projects or improvements. Not everything is infrastructure. There are other ways to make walking and biking, or to encourage walking and biking. We've recommended 4 programs, 4 groupings of activities. One is under the promotion and encouragement label, so you might be familiar with Bike to Work Day. That's one example. We're also proposing that the city consider seasonal or annual street closures in the downtown for, say, Sunday streets type events where the community can gather on the street. The second will be Safe Routes to School. Because of the nature of those kinds of projects, it would probably have to be led by the school district, but the city could support it. The third one is traffic safety and education for the general public. And the fourth one is to respond to all the complaints that we got about driver behavior, is enhanced enforcement of traffic laws. And then there's some additional sort of miscellaneous actions that the city could consider. One, just to give you an example, is to put in bike parking through the downtown at all city facilities. Another example is bike sharing that you might be familiar with. And then the last part is what we're calling the longer-term improvements. Like I said, there weren't really great opportunities for paths and trails that the city could sort of make happen in the next couple of years. So we've identified, I think there were 11 spots around the city where people desired these connections, but it just was clear that they were not going to happen overnight. To give you an example, Crestmore Canyon, it's part of the general plan. The general plan talks about opening it up for recreation. We heard a lot from the community that would be a great connection, but it's going to take a lot of time, effort, and money in order to open up the canyon for public use. So it's flagged as a longer-term improvement because we want to keep it out in front, but with the understanding that it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. And I believe this is my last slide. In terms of implementing the plan, again, I just gave you a sense of the package of improvements that's included in the plan. We understand that most of the funding will probably have to come from outside funding sources. That's usually the case in most jurisdictions. There's a lot of grant funding opportunities coming up this fall, next year. I would say that most of the projects in the plan would be good candidates, would qualify well. Of course, these are competitive funding sources, and so San Bruno will be competing against other jurisdictions, so it's not guaranteed. And then the last thing that I'll mention is I've been brainstorming with staff on what are some of the sort of easier to implement, higher visibility things that the city could do in the next year or two to start showing the community that there is progress happening, that there is a city commitment to implementing the plan, and we've come up with some ideas. One is signage and sharrows on the bike routes. Those are not expensive things to do. There's a couple of projects where you could just, there's enough room to put in bike lanes, so all you have to do is just paint the lines. A third one is implement some of these crossing improvements on Cherry Avenue, which lit up as an area of concern for people crossing just because there's the large employers there. Demonstration parklets on San Mateo Avenue. Those are areas where you would extend the sidewalk, create seating for people to congregate. I mentioned bike parking in city facilities and through the downtown. A dedicated pedestrian and bicycle section on the San Bruno Response webpage where people can request minor fixes and maintenance of pedestrian and bicycle facilities. And then the last one is, as I said, some of these community activities in the downtown. I believe that's the end of my presentation.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
So El Camino and 280 and Skyline, what kind of cooperation do you anticipate getting from Caltrans?
Yes. Thank you. Those streets are controlled by Caltrans. They're state routes. Anything that would be done on those streets would have to be done with cooperation of Caltrans. Caltrans has come around I would say a long way in the last few years in terms of being more sensitive to pedestrians and cyclists, they have embraced the complete streets approach, where anytime they're putting in a new facility, they consider the needs of all users, not just drivers. I would say that anything major would probably have to wait for a big renovation project. Say if they're tearing down a highway ramp, for example, and rebuilding it, then you can expect some really good improvements. Otherwise, you're going to be working with them on, minor things, but still potentially effective, like bulb outs, warning signs.
Okay.
They're on board.
And to staff, aren't there some planned improvements on Cherry supported by YouTube and Walmart?
Yes, there are, and I think that probably our Public Services Director could provide more detail on that. But yes, there are. We are working with those entities on installing improvements on Cherry Avenue to improve pedestrian and bicycle safety in that area. I think in the concept plan that Mr. Lee presented, the idea was to look at what could occur in addition in terms of protected bike lanes and whatnot. So his concept plan even took it a step further in terms of what could be in the future.
Okay. So is there some type of coordination between what's planned by them and what we're trying to do here?
Yes.
Okay. Marty?
So for the first map that you had up there that identified a lot of dots, do you have a breakdown in the estimated cost to do those things?
There is, and the implementation chapter breaks down the cost by types of improvements, and it provides an overall cost for all the recommended improvements.
And for the recommended improvements that you have now, what range of dollars are we
The
talking?
cost over 10 years is estimated to be, I believe it's $10.8 million, so that's about $1 million a year. Again, with the understanding that most of that would have to come from outside funding sources.
And if I could, through the mayor, to kind of expand on that, what the plan proposes is a framework of projects and programs that the city could consider as funds are available. And the intent of the plan really is to try to lay out, as funding is available, what would the priority be in terms of seeking funding and implementing projects. But we realize that the City Council will have a broad range of other improvements to consider within the community. So as these improvements can be factored in and funding identified, this framework would help council, staff, and the community identify which projects could go forward and which would provide or address for some of the concerns raised by citizens and identified by the consultants in terms of our existing bicycle and pedestrian networks.
Thank you.
Okay. Anyone else? Okay.
Th-
Irene?
Oh. David, would you elaborate a little bit on the committee that you were discussing creating?
I'd be happy to. I think with any plan like this, it's important that there's a focus on implementation. So as our staff and as Nico Latunic has indicated, we anticipate a need to identify funding to implement these projects. At this point, to just clarify, the funding that we have is really to prepare and adopt this plan. That's it. So the plan identifies a range of projects and programs that staff and the consultants have identified that could implement the plan, but we'll need to find funding to actually do that implementation over time. The idea of, I'll refer to it as an implementation task force, is that the core would be departments, various department individuals, public services, community development, city manager, et cetera, so that there would be a focus on what are the opportunities. We would investigate opportunities for grant funding, Nico and his team has given us a whole list of funding opportunities. I know CCAG and a variety of agencies have grants available, but it's important to have staff members that are actually prepared to go out and seek those opportunities, prepare those applications, come back to you and say, we've identified funding, here are some projects in the plan that we believe could be implemented. What are your thoughts? Do you support us proceeding ahead, obtaining these grants, and doing these projects? So it is important to have a task force like that, staff identified to make sure that there's focus on implementation. So that is the concept.
Through the chair. I kind of envision this as we're doing a parking study of the city parking lots. And inside of that, we should be looking at how to make those pedestrian safe. And we should be looking at putting in bike racks. We should be looking at putting in electric charging units or stations. That kind of coordination is going to get us some of the improvements we hope to do and add to our climate action plan that we just had a study session about. So I'm excited that all these things are coming together at the same time, and I know there is funding out there, so cross your fingers.
And I would agree, and by the various staff members talking about this plan on a regular basis, as there are individual projects that come up, and there are the opportunities, Councilmember O'Connell, that you mentioned, you know, an opportunity to put in a bike rack, an opportunity to put in a bike lane, an opportunity to do something to implement the plan. As we're talking about this and keep this plan fresh, we'll better realize those opportunities. That's the idea.
Marty?
The role of the Bicycle Pedestrian Committee, where do they fit in with staff, and how does that going to work?
Well, they have obviously a very important role. They're advisory, as you know, to City Council on matters of walking and biking in the community. So what we would imagine is coordinating this implementation task force with the Bike Ped Committee and working with them. And as there are identified opportunities for grants, we would check in with them. In fact, the routine now is that we actually go to the Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Committee as we find these opportunities, and we say, here's an opportunity, what do you think? And they work with staff, and they in fact recommend or help recommend which projects to proceed with. So we would anticipate working closely with BPAC in terms of that task force that I mentioned.
Great.
Ken, did you have something?
I just wanted to say that San Bruno is not new to this. And as a representative on CCAG's Bicycle and Pedestrian Committee for about 10 years now, I think staff and the committee has done very well in the past addressing issues and applying for grants and winning grants. In fact, we got a $100,000 grant to do this study. So now you have an overall plan. Now it's going hand in hand with the transit corridor plan and other master plans that we have in the city, and we have a clear vision on what we can do. And yes, there's money coming every single year, and we're ahead of some of our neighboring cities. There are some cities that are more bicycle in tune down in the South County, but San Bruno is right there, and I think we know what we want to do and what we want to accomplish, and compliment you on being able to get the community involved to look to the future, and be able to be positioned to make these improvements.
We agree, and this plan will make us even more competitive, as you would know, in going after those grant applications. So we're very excited about that.
Great. And
so if we could, maybe
Paula?
Paula Bradley can talk about next steps.
great.
Good evening, City Council, Honorable Mayor. I'm Paula Bradley, the project planner. And staff is asking the City Council to provide further suggestions, comments, and amendments prior to staff submitting the plan to the City Council to consider possible adoption of the plan. And if the City Council does adopt the plan, staff would then incorporate the amendments that are proposed and presented with the plan, and that would be incorporated as the final adopted walk and bike plan. And in conclusion, I'd just like to say that it's been a great experience working with the community, working with BPAC, working with city staff, and networking with other agencies and jurisdictions. And this is really an exciting plan. It was a pleasure to get to work on it. Thank you.
If you don't mind, I'd like to say a few words. Can I do that?
Sure.
My name is Malcolm Robinson. I've lived in San Bruno 27 years. I will not be at the next city council meeting where you hopefully adopt this plan, but I want to give you 3 reasons to do that. Community, health, and safety, okay? And from a health perspective, human beings have walked all over the planet before we had automobiles. And I think if you look at the health of people today versus 1,000 years ago, we are in trouble. Human beings need to move around. It's a healthy environment. It helps by people recreating together. You build a sense of community. 3 years ago, my wife dragged me down to water aerobics in the community pool. She's showering now. She just got out. I would urge you all to spend an evening in the pool, do the water aerobics class. It's healthy. It's fun. You know, lose a few pounds. It's good for you. We live about a block. My wife and I live about a block from Sweeney Ridge Trail. And we hike it all the time. But we've met a lot of people in our neighborhood and from other locales that come there. And through that, we've built a sense of community, just as we've done with Carol, for example, at the water aerobics, because you're having fun, you get a little sun, and you get to meet people, live in your neighborhood, and it helps expand the sense of community that we now enjoy living in San Bruno. Safety. My wife will not ride a bicycle in San Bruno. It's unsafe, according to her. And it's questionable because we don't have bike lanes. On page 3 of the binder, you see a Class 1 bike trail, and that's like San Andreas Trail. That picture is Centennial Trail that ends at San Bruno. If you stand at the corner of 7th Avenue and San Bruno Avenue, and you look east, you can see the San Francisco Bay Area Bayside Trail. It's just a few hundred yards away. We could connect to that and bring people into our businesses to buy Gatorade and refreshments. So we're really close to being right there. This plan goes a long way towards the basic blocking and tackling of having a safe community for biking and walking. So I would urge you to show leadership on this cause, help build the community, help make it safer for us. And from you, we're looking for leadership to help bring this plan to fruition. Now, when the price tag was mentioned, I saw all of you cringe, right? I know it's a lot of money. If there's somewhere a Maslow's hierarchy of, what a city government should be doing, hiking and biking probably are not at the top, but they're lower level. It's not as fancy, not as essential as bringing water and hauling away sewage from individual homes, but having a healthy, vibrant sense of community is important to us, and I think this plan goes a long way to doing that. And I'd also like to thank Dave and Nico and the people that have done a lot of work to assess the current state of walking and bicycling, it's easy for me to say, here in San Bruno. They've done a lot of work, and I'd like to commend them for their efforts. And I thank you for your time.
All right, thank you very much. Just want to say in general, all our boards, commissions, and committees are doing a wonderful job, but especially the Bike and Ped. You've done an extraordinary job on what's an extraordinary document here, which is available for anyone to see. And it's just so much work and so many hours, volunteer hours, that are put into this. And staff's done a great job too. So, David, next steps.
Well, next steps, receive your comments tonight. So any suggestions or comments for further changes or amendments, we would appreciate. We'll take your comments, we'll assemble them, as Paula Bradley indicated, into a resolution. We already have an errata that you have a copy of in your packet. It shows you the amendments that went to the Planning Commission. The Planning Commission has already reviewed this walk and bike plan. They're recommending City Council approval with those amendments. We indicated in the errata sheet that we are continuing to receive comments on the plan, so there are some comments that we received since Planning Commission, which we laid out in that errata sheet. So the expectation is that we would come back to you possibly at your next meeting, July 26th, that's our target, and we would have a resolution with the errata sheet with those suggested amendments for consideration for adoption. So those are the next steps. As Paula mentioned, our project planner manager on this, the idea is that upon adoption, we would take the errata sheet comments, the amendments, and those would be brought in to amend the document that you have in front of you. We would do final formatting, print it out as the final adopted plan. That would then be the base for, as we talked about, as you heard our staff and consultant talk about, that would be our base for pursuing grant funding to do the projects, many of the projects indicated. And our focus really is with this safety. Now, we understand there are longer-term projects, and they're great, and we hope to get to those at some point. But based on public comments and based on the assessment of our consultants, looking at our core area and understanding that we've adopted the TCP in February of 2013, we passed Measure N in November of 2014, the focus really is what can we do to support our core area, the TCP area, the north-south corridor, connecting the Centennial Trail that you heard about this evening from one of our committee members, to the BART station, to the Caltrain station, to downtown and beyond to Millbrae. What can we do in terms of improvements as we go forward, budget to budget, to connect over across El Camino Real to City Park, to move people safely back and forth to City Park, to move people safely back and forth from BART station, the shops at Tanforan, into the crossing area, into the employment area of our Bay Hill Office Park. So that core area we anticipate would be the focus of improvements. And of course, as Nico indicated, to the extent over the next 6 or 12 months we can do some projects that are pretty easy to do to generate enthusiasm and whatnot, we'll try to do those. The painting of bike lanes, placement of bike racks and those kinds of things. So those are the anticipated next steps.
Okay. Anything for David or staff at this time? Irene?
I already gave David a lot of my suggestions. I just want to clarify that just because it's printed here or even printed in the bike plan, that each concept and each change has to go through a vetting type system or through a traffic study or a lot of different things. So I don't want people to get too excited about some of these things. And I noticed even in the comments, there were a lot of them, over 1,300 of them, some of the people had opposite opinions about safety at certain places or different things. So this is a roadmap, it's a conceptual plan, it's something we aspire to and that we want to coordinate with our other departments to do the best job we can, but while we keep our expectations realistic. So that's.
Anyone else?
Thank you.
I think you bring it back. Great, thank you very much. And once again, thanks for all your hard work. Staff also, it's just, combine it all, it's thousands of hours, so it's very much appreciated in this exciting times. We can actually do some of this stuff.